John Niehaus, Director of Program Development for the National Association of Flight Instructors. I'd like to welcome you to this edition to the NAFI 10 Question Challenge, the online video series where I ask 10 questions to successful instructors and see if I can't figure out their secrets and how they transition that into professional success. My guest today is Warren Smith. He is a CFI, II, MEI, former DPE, specializing in aerial application, aerobatics, and tailwheel. He's been a 141 chief. He's been a 121 check airman, a 135 chief pilot, a accident investigator. He has 5 type ratings, former chairperson for the NATA, National Air Trade Association Flight Training Committee. He's the former corporate pilot for the Jacksonville Jaguars and for Jimmy John's, and he's currently working for the FAA as part of the FAST Team program. Warren, welcome.
Welcome, John. Great to be here with you.
I'm so glad you had the time. We'll just get straight into it. Was flight instructing part of your original career plan, or was it something that you never anticipated doing?
You know, I started instructing back in early to mid 80s. There were no jobs back in those times. And so, actually flight instructing kind of was part of my career, design. I didn't see that as an end goal, but my goal in life was to be a crop duster. I grew up on a farm. That's really what got me interested in flying, was seeing all the crop dusters kind of buzzing around all summer long. And so when I got in and got to that point, I happened to be out of school that kind of specialized in that kind of training. So that was the job. Is once I got a flight instructor certificate, I was able to go to begin instructing at that school. And so I just knew that it was going to be that to build the time and do those things. And so in that way, yes, it was a part of my career plan to do that. I'm glad I did.
Yeah, I graduated my university in 2009, so I sort of understand what it means to come out in a less than great economic time. So yeah, I totally get it.
Yeah, absolutely. But then as I look back, that time spent instructing has, as we'll see probably as we go through here, but that's just impacted my entire aviation career going forward and provided me, as I looked at, almost every opportunity that I've had has come from instructing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So reflecting on your aviation skill with your first student, how well do you think you did?
It was not good, John. Oh man. And here's the thing is, as any new instructor, and I was no exception to this, is, you've just come out of a course of training. You've worked, private commercial instrument, CFI. And so you've kind of been in this funnel, and you've been held to this very high standard nowadays, of course, with the ACS. And so to then go from that environment into, say, first private pilot student, where like literally maybe the first few flights, they're plus or minus 400 feet or so. I mean, that's difficult to withstand. And so you constantly, and so what I was doing as a new instructor is I was holding students to way too high a standard in the beginning. I was like, hey, watch your altitude, airspeed. I was just too tight. And then at the end, towards their, when they were preparing for a check ride, I was actually not holding them too high enough a standard. And so it's like my training funnel was almost inverted. I should have been looser in the beginning, allowing them to kind of explore that space and kind of bring that into focus, not just to minimum standards, but to beyond minimum standards. So there at the end, I wasn't holding them to high enough standards. So that took me a while to learn that funnel. And honestly, I don't know that I really learned it well until I began to really, I think that's a benefit of curriculum in the beginning, because it sets that funnel. But I didn't really notice down there in the beginning, completion standards for that first few flights is literally like plus or minus 400 feet. It's like, we can do better than that. But watching, when you begin to write curriculum or use that curriculum, you see that funnel. And I think that was probably the biggest mistake I made in the beginning. And it's something I had to learn over time, unfortunately, probably at the expense of a few students. I think I learned a lot from them. but I had a lot of enthusiasm, and that makes up for a lot when you're young and going through that stuff. So.
Yeah, I had something similar, not so much on the standards standpoint, but coming from a 141 environment, I was so used to the career pilots. I want to be a professional pilot here or there. And my first instructing job was Part 61, and those were people that were coming in to have fun. And I was teaching as if they were there, to become pilots for a living. And that was hard for me to wrap my mind around, because these guys are like, come on, man, relax. It's not that big of a deal. I'm like, yeah, but so it's not so much from the standard standpoint, but I understand where you're coming from in the sense that you've got to find the groove to be able to tailor that to the student and make sure that you're not being too difficult for them.
Yeah. It's a tough. It sounds simple, but it's kind of a fine line to walk there and kind of lead them into that funnel.
So most of us have had an instructor mentor who've helped us along the way. Who was yours, and what was the most meaningful thing they taught you?
I was really fortunate. I had a lot of really just great mentors, good instructors. One really terrible instructor that probably taught me a few things too. And I could list off some names that probably wouldn't mean a lot to you, mean a lot to me, but maybe a little bit outside the box on this is, I think of just some of the authors. Back in the 80s, we didn't have computers and smartphones and YouTube, stuff like that. So I read a lot of books. And so a lot of those authors really were transformational to me. One was Peter Dogan. I don't know if you're familiar with Peter Dogan and his instrument flying handbook. That was popular. He did like 10-day instrument training courses back in the day. You literally get your instrument rating like in 10 days. And he would travel around the country, and he had this system of teaching instruments that really transformed the way I taught instruments. It gave me a very efficient system to teach instruments. So people like Peter Dogan, Bill Kirshner was big back in the day, Barry Schiff with his Proficient Pilot. I just learned so many this little, you kind of learn the big picture, but these books taught me kind of the finer things of, how to determine your descent rate for an ILS before you ever fly it based on your ground speed. Just little tips like that that were in these books. So Richard Collins and Greg Brown's a good friend of mine. Greg Brown's Turbine Pilot Flight Manual got me through a few interviews and things like that. So when I think of mentors, a lot of times I just think of those kind of folks. And there's those people today. I know like Jason Shappert's doing things out there with Bold Method. So I encourage those people that are just really putting out good content, available through NAFI, these sort of organizations. But I was really fortunate to just to have some great instructors. And what they really taught me, the best ones, I think, was a discipline and a habit forming a method of teaching, like again, little things. Like I remember flying with an instructor one time. I was actually a passenger. They were a pilot, and just observing them, and they would do little things like when they would begin their taxi light would come on. When they would stop their taxi light would come off. But it was like they didn't have to think about it. It was like attached to the brake pedal kind of thing. So if that makes sense, take off, positive rate, gear up, lights off. They just had a rhythm and a flow about them. And that's really what they taught me is, you need to operate like the same way every time. They would pre-flight the same way. They walk around the airplane the same way. They had discipline with checklists. They would run the same way. And when you do that, you can detect errors and omissions and problems. They just glare out because, wait, that is out of the normal. So I was so fortunate to have those people that made me form great habits as a pilot. They weren't sloppy when they taxied out. They taxied out on the center line. It was like every flight was a check ride. And so when it came to a check ride, they just didn't fly any differently. It was just another normal flight because they've been holding themselves to this standard all along, just by being disciplined, using good habits, and it was just automatic. And check ride, yeah, just go fly like I fly every day. So overall, that's what I really took away, and that's what I try to pass on now when I teach. I try to teach habit formation from the very beginning. Like I just want to do this the same. This may seem like, weird, and I'm going to be kind of on you a little bit, but you're going to have a great habit of pre-flight when you're done with this. You're going to have a great discipline for checklist usage when you're done with this. And that just goes a long ways in check ride preparation right from day one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what was the most, or what is the most valuable non-aviation skill you've learned from being a flight instructor?
I would say, and this will probably be a theme with me, is just the ability to teach. When you're a flight instructor, it goes beyond just aviation knowledge, aviation skill, to an ability to not only teach a technical subject, but to teach a skill. And they're really two separate things. A lot of, say, university professors or things like that, they can teach knowledge, but to teach someone a skill, such as flying or maybe riding a bicycle or water skiing, I don't know, pick your skill, but it's, you now understand things like learning plateaus. And I think best of all, it's taught me not to just be a student of aviation, but to be a student of people, and kind of how they learn. Like you brought up a great example when you said that, sometimes someone's in this for just recreational flying. Sometimes someone is in this for professional. So you kind of learn like, okay, this person's coming at this skill for a different purpose. Mm-hmm. So I need to incorporate that into my training and teaching. And so and this took me time to kind of develop this, but I can kind of read the student and kind of best how to come alongside them in transferring this skill. So many times, we look at, we want the best pilot or the most experienced pilot to be our instructor, but often what you really want is a teacher. You want someone who can transfer the knowledge, and that's just because they have a lot of experience doesn't mean they can actually teach it. So even like the difference between men and women in teaching men how to fly, teaching women how to fly, I think there's a difference in boundaries and things. One, you're kind of trying to pull back the boundaries a little bit. One, you're trying to kind of expand the boundaries. And so, I'd say just being able to teach it's transferred me into other, in my career right now. Basically what I do is I teach, but my experience and my background in instructing has taught me how to basically go into almost any situation and be able to teach in that environment, and mainly read the person, mm-hmm. and then transfer that knowledge over.
So what do you enjoy most about flight instruction?
Aviation is so awesome because it's just absolutely life changing for people. It changed my whole life. I mean, when I learned to fly, that was just a line in the sand. That changed my entire direction in life. So as you're able to come along someone and instruct them, you're always their instructor, like for life. Mm-hmm. So I have people like literally back in the 80s, like I taught to fly. And when I see them, I'm still in contact with many of those people, and they always introduce me as, hey, this was my instructor. This is the guy who taught me how to fly. I have a guy that, he's a captain for long time now, captain for Delta. And every time I see him, he's like, this guy is my instructor. This guy taught me how to fly. And so when you build those relationships, it's just an intimate environment in the airplane. I know everything about them. I know their kids, their dogs, it's just, you just come to know them very well. They trust you. And so building those relationships, I think, has been just the most fulfilling and enjoyable thing about it. I was just, it was before COVID, so it was probably last year sometime. I was in the back of an airplane just as a passenger, really not paying attention at all. But I was getting off the airplane from the cockpit. I hear, "Hey, Warren." And sure enough, it was one of these folks that I had instructed a long time ago. was now captain, was flying, and they would introduce me to the first officer, like, this was my instructor, this guy taught me how to fly. It's just amazing, especially over time, as you go and you look back on those relationships and how you changed that person's life and gave them a skill that's now still serving them today. Pretty cool.
So what is your most interesting, scary, or fun story operating as an instructor?
Oh my goodness. I would have to say, I'll probably go with scary, I guess.
Okay.
I don't know if you've probably never done this, but I actually landed, I was in a traffic pattern with we were doing takeoffs and landings. And we landed so hard and so slow, the doors flew open and kind of locked and stayed open. And so we're kind of sitting there like, I thought the aircraft has to be damaged, but it wasn't. But it was that moment that taught me probably one of the most valuable lessons that I've ever learned. And then this is another great thing about instructing, because when you instruct, you really learn. You learn a lot of hard lessons. This was a hard one, but and I would go back to kind of one of the original questions was, your first students and things like that. And I had to learn boundaries, because when I first started, I was just overly protective. I mean, I grabbing the controls and, watch this. And I had to learn to you got to just kind of sit back and allow the student to make mistakes. But you can't go too far. And that day I let a situation go too far. And fortunately we kind of met the earth just soon enough. It was a little more farther. We probably could have had an accident, but I was like, okay. And so I had to learn, I have to allow the student, first lesson was I have to allow the student to make mistakes. And, if the aircraft's going to stall and spin, we probably just need to let it stall and spin, and we'll recover and we'll be okay, but they're going to learn something from that when that's appropriate. But also, man, I have to be ready and have to realize, okay, this situation is going too far. I have to intervene. And until I could see both of those boundaries, now I had the parameters to stay inside. But those were hard lessons on both ends. When both doors fly open, man, it's not a good landing. We walked away from it, so I guess it's a good landing, but that scared me.
Yeah. the coiled cobra, where you're just sitting there going, not yet, there.
Yeah. And so you're kind of very calm on the outside, but you're kind of right there. And you kind of maybe learn even how to kind of nudge things and do it where they don't even know it, but you're kind of helping them along. But somehow they have to build that confidence, because they got to be able to do this by themselves one day. So you got to be able to hit those boundaries, but safely.
So in your mind, what quality or skill makes for an exceptional flight instructor?
Well, again, I would probably just go back to that good teacher. It's not just about aviation knowledge. It's not just about being the best pilot in the world. I mean, that's almost really a given. Yeah, you have to be those things, but an exceptional flight instructor will go beyond that baseline requirement and actually become a student of teaching and a student of the student themselves. So the best instructor, you'll know the best instructors, because you'll know that person who, if you're having a problem with a student and they're just not progressing or not getting there, you can say, man, I need to get this instructor involved, because they'll fly with that student for an hour and they'll tell you exactly what the situation is, because they can just sense that, and they can say, and sometimes, what that is that come to know is sometimes it's like, this person should not be a pilot. I mean, that's pretty tough when you come to, I don't know if you've ever had those, John, where you're flying with somebody and you've actually had to tell them, please do not become a pilot. And here's how I do that. I say, I want you to be a pilot. I don't want you to be a licensed pilot flying by yourself. And a lot of times it's like business people that you run into. their minds are everywhere except flying, and you know they're never going to be able to separate just what in their head for business and making good, solid decisions as pilot in command.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've had a couple of students, and I've had to tell them, like, do not, please, please, please don't. But I'm just going to fly with you, or we're going to have somebody just fly with you anytime you want. If you want to buy an airplane, buy an airplane. And this guy did. He bought a Bonanza. And for decades, he flew in the left seat, always with another pilot with him. And this guy furthered his business, but he always had somebody kind of helping him make decisions. He loved it. He got to fly. He got to own an aircraft. He got to do everything except become a licensed pilot. And sometimes, that's a tough thing to tell someone, but sometimes that's the best decision. So, being an instructor, sometimes you have to have those difficult discussions.
Well, I mean, I think you mentioned it earlier. To be a good instructor, I mean, you have to care. And sometimes caring means passing on some news that the other individual may not particularly like, but is in their best interest.
Oh, yeah, that's a quality of a really good instructor, because they care about the safety and the future of this individual, not just making a pilot. Making a safe pilot, and allowing this person to enjoy aviation in a way that has longevity and safe for their family and everybody involved.
Mm-hmm. So what aspect of flight instruction best prepared you for what you do now?
Again, I would say kind of back to this theme of it taught me to be a teacher. And that's probably the most difficult part of getting a flight instructor certificate is, you're already a commercial pilot. You've done these maneuvers. Okay, you're doing them from another seat. But a lot of times folks coming into that have just never had to teach it. And as you can kind of understand it, but when you have to explain it systematically and in a way that someone else does, they just haven't done that. So they struggle in the check rides trying to teach, which is understandable because we just haven't taught yet. So, the ability to teach has just been, I would say, invaluable to me, because and honestly, it's prepared me for everything I've done as I look back, and because I was instructor, I became a chief instructor. Because I was instructor, I became a check airman. Because of the instructor, I became a designated pilot examiner. And now in my job currently, I'm a fast team program manager for the FAA. Guess what I do? I go around and I teach people about aviation safety. So that ability to teach has prepared me not just for a CFI certificate and things like that in instructing, but honestly, career-wide, always. It seems like you're always mentoring. If you're an experienced pilot, people are looking to you for information, whether you're flying with them, you're teaching in some way.
So as a partnership to that question, how did you utilize or leverage your time as a CFI to transition into some of the things, the 135, the 121?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I never knew it at the time when I became an instructor and started those early years of instructing, and I got to do some really cool stuff because of the school. I was very interested in aerial application, crop dusting. That's fortunately I just couldn't find the right opportunities in that. They never developed, but what did develop was opportunities as a flight instructor. And so that whole basis of instructing set me up for an entire career in aviation for everything. Every company I've ever been to, I've always kind of emerged as an instructor, as a teacher, and it's given me advancement opportunities. It's given me additional pay. It was awesome being a designated pilot examiner. That comes from an instructional background and having that instructor background to be able to do the check rides. And that was a great time. Got to, so many people come up to me today and say, oh, hey, you gave me my such and such check ride. And I was like, did I pass you? Are you still mad at me? Or, how's that going? And they're like, no, it was a good experience. So, but it still wasn't as good as that instructing experience, because the check ride is just kind of one or two events, and you're kind of like, they remember me, I don't remember them. But in instructing, I remember, we're pretty good friends. And so it just set me up for my entire career, to the point of, that's exactly what I'm doing today, is I'm instructing. So valuable, so valuable.
Well, it's fun. One of the coolest things I think that happened to me is I've leveraged myself into different places. I did a short stint at a 121 regional, and the first day in ground school, the instructor came up and he said, all right, I've got 50 individuals sitting in front of me. How many of you have or just transitioned from being flight instructors? And probably 70% of us raised our hand. And he said, good. And we all kind of looked at him like, well, what do you mean? And he says, instructors make the best pilots for what we're trying to do. We encourage and we actively look for instructors. So for me, that kind of lit off a light bulb of like, okay, not only can I do this, but they actually picked me because of my time in what I've been doing previously. I just thought that was neat.
That is, I've gotten to fly with so many pilots, and, especially in the airlines, you fly with somebody different all the time. You can tell when someone has spent some serious time instructing. I remember one particular time we were, this was in a jet aircraft. We had kind of flown to this little airport, and the pilot, I was the first officer, but the pilot was having a hard time determining the runway and how to enter the pattern. And I was kind of like, what is this? But then they kind of revealed to me that they'd never been an instructor. And it's just little things like that. When you're an instructor and you have to you got to think this through, because the students are going to do it all wrong. So you're kind of waiting to catch them, but you just know, you can all of a sudden just build this picture in your head. And then you kind of just take it for granted and you think everyone knows that. Mm-hmm. But instructing really cements little things, and you can just tell. You can just tell when someone has been an instructor.
So final question. If you could give a new instructor one piece of advice for success in the profession, what would it be?
Don't let your CFI expire, maybe. I actually did that for the first time.
Oh, no.
I know, God, a year or two ago. I was like, oh, I missed it, And so I had to go take a check ride. And honestly, it was a great experience. Like, no, I don't know why we as instructors, like, don't ever let it expire. It's terrible. It was actually kind of good, to go actually. So I went and took a check ride, but it's weird being in the FAA and having to take a check ride from the FAA. It was, it's kind of got to go to, anyway, it was a whole can of worms, but you hear that a lot, but I don't know that that's the end all be all, because taking another check ride can actually be kind of beneficial every once in a while to just do that. So it wasn't bad. I guess the best advice kind of goes back to kind of what I've been talking about before. It's, don't just be a student of aviation. Don't just be a student of flying and just building on your experience and things like that, but be a teacher, learn to be a teacher, to be a student of the students, and just really watch. I had one of the best experiences ever. I got to teach my son and my daughter how to fly, which a lot of people would buy now. And I also tried to teach my wife how to fly. Huge mistake. Like, don't do that. And sometimes it can be difficult with your kids, because you got to get kind of tough. You got to be like, you're not cutting it. You got to do a little better. So, but I was able to teach them how to fly. I have a son and a daughter. And even like teaching my son to fly was completely different than teaching my daughter to fly. I mean, I had to rely upon just my experience and just understanding people. Like sometimes with my daughter, we would just have to today we're just going to kind of just do a short little cross country and just kind of allow this to absorb in and take a little break, where, my son was always like charging in, like pushing hard. I had to kind of set boundaries for him but I had to, so I'm always kind of pulling him back a little bit. But with my daughter, I had to kind of expand boundaries a little bit.
Mhm.
But women are awesome pilots because they understand risk, and they mitigate risk, I think, better than men do. But there's just this difference. So that's my advice: is study the art of teaching and
Mhm.
transferring knowledge and skill to students.
Yeah, not only do people learn differently, but different types of people absorb that knowledge differently.
Oh yeah, different cultures. You have to approach differently. There definitely is no cookie cutter. Um, you have to adapt to where that person is. They have different things they've brought in that transfer negatively and positively, and to be able to sort that out and apply it. It takes a little time. So just get above and beyond your aviation knowledge, get it cemented. I call that the hard chair. That's the chair where you're hitting the books, you're studying, you've taken check rides, you're always doing that. But at some point you have to kind of move over to a soft chair and say, okay, how do I relate this to this particular person in a way that it brings it into and makes it real for them.
Makes perfect sense to me, and I think that's great advice. Now, Warren, we've made it through the questions. Do you have any final thoughts or anything that you are working on that you want to tell everybody?
Well, like I said, I'm a fast team program manager, so I'm a guy that's always out promoting aviation safety, and I think that's something else. A message I'm trying to get across is airlines understand this. 135 professional pilots kind of get to an understanding of this. Then that is proficiency versus currency. As a professional pilot, you're taking proficiency checks. The concern is, are you proficient? But in the GA world, and especially the recreational world, our word for that is currency. So we are, hey, am I current? Am I current? We need to rise to a level of proficiency in general aviation because proficiency works. The airlines have proven this. Their safety record is unmatched. But GA is still stuck kind of, I think, in currency mindset. In other words, better go out and get those approaches in because to stay current. Rather than, am I proficient at what I'm doing? And I think the best way to do this is do it the same way the airlines and everybody else do it, is to be in a proficiency program. The FAA's program for that is called WINGS, and that is an ongoing program of flying. And basically you should fly quarterly with someone, an instructor or someone, because you can't see your own mistakes. I talked about that habit formation and things like that. Bad habits creep in to flying for everyone. They just creep in, and you're often kind of blind to them. And you need someone else, not just a good buddy, but a good friend who will say, Warren, you're just a little sloppy right there. You're not applying crosswind correction. You look at you, you're just, ailerons are neutral as you're taxiing out. We got a big wind over here. You're not on the center line. That takeoff, you just kind of drifted off. Hey, did you notice you're always landing on the left side of the center line? You need somebody to point that out. So I just get in some kind of proficiency training program like WINGS. There's other, Cirrus has programs. And as an instructor, I just encourage instructors to be involved in those programs, but also use those programs with their students. It's just more flying for you. It's a safer student. And then they're learning the difference between proficiency and currency. And the other thing I would just say with instructors, especially during this crazy times of COVID and things going on, don't overlook the FAA as a career path too. I didn't ever think I would be in the FAA or this is the best job I've ever had, is be able to talk like people like John and just talk about aviation safety, and you kind of get to wear the white hat, and you're not this enforcement that everybody thinks of as the FAA. But I just love going out, talking to people about aviation safety. the wings program and making them safer pilots. So it just brings us full circle, John. It's like, I am so glad I became an instructor. It kind of set me along this path, and it's exactly what I'm doing here, some 36 years later.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I also encourage everybody to participate in the wings program. It's a wonderful thing, and as Warren said, it's anything that helps proficiency and safety in pilots, and of course your students, is a good thing. So, Warren, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, John. It's been fun. Thank you.
Awesome. Take care.
Take care now.